This is Supply Chain Breakdown, and for the next 30 minutes, we'll be breaking down the generative AI value gap. Now, my name is Conor. I'm Communications Director here at Lokad. And to my right, as always, Lokad founder, Joannes Vemorel. Now, to be clear, when we say generative AI value gap, we mean, and I quote, the overall lack of clear data supporting positive return on investment, ROI, for many enterprise AI projects. Now, before we get into that, comment below what supply chain problems are you hoping Gen AI will solve? And also get your questions in as soon as possible. Joannes and I will discuss those in about 20 minutes. Now, let's push on. Joannes, the background to this conversation came about when I found some surveys from big consulting firms and from some public institutions, basically talking about the questionable return on investment for these AI projects we're talking about. Now, for anyone who missed that, a very quick primer. According to BCG, that's Boston Consulting Group, approximately 75% of companies can't scale or monetize their AI projects. According to McKinsey, 80% thereabouts see zero EBIT impact. According to PwC, at least half of companies have not even run AI risk checks. And according to KPMG, approximately 1 out of 10 major execs at multi-billion-dollar companies are, quote, highly confident in ever seeing ROI for their projects. Now, I hear that, and I raise you Harvard, who said between 0.5 and 3.5% of work hours actually use generative AI, and that translates to approximately a 0.5% productivity boost. The National Bureau of Economic Research in 2025 said AI chatbots have had no significant impact on earnings. And lastly, according to Reuters, more than 50% of major organizations are not even tracking the ROI of these projects. Now, Joannes, I could go on genuinely for the full 30 minutes, but I come to you and I say, do any of those figures surprise you?
No, it's the exact same patterns that the industry observes with all, I would say, transformative technologies. You see, that the web 25 years ago was exactly the same. If you go 45 years ago, that was the introduction of computing in companies, same thing. More recently, let's say cloud computing, again, same. So the bottom line is that when you have a transformative technologies, it's very intriguing. A lot of companies see the technology, they correctly identify that it's massive, that it's transformative, and they do something and it fails miserably. And that happens over and over and over. And it may sound so, 90% failure may sound like absolutely terrible, but the reality is that the 10% that will succeed will change the industry forever. So you can have both at the same time, something where it's 90% failure and the last 10% that change the industry. And again, if you go back to the web, the reality is that the quasi-totality of the investment made for web stuff in the 2000s went extremely poorly, and yet here we are 25 years later, and the web is everything. E-commerce is super massive. 80, I think, % plus of people find their date online, etc. The impact is absolutely enormous. Videos and movies are now sold through the web. You know, that's Netflix. So the impact is enormous, but the web portals that were en vogue in the 2000s, they're gone. That was, I would say, among many similar bad ideas of the time. And I think generative AI is on a course that is very similar. There are tons of gadgetoid takes that will fail. And my take is not so much that we see a lack of returns, because again, early stage for transformative technologies, I would say we should not be fooled by the lack of metrics. But the question is more like the lack of substance. Are you doing something that is truly meaningful with that? At Lokad, we have more than half a dozen now of projects, and they have they have, on some segments where we are using those technologies, they have completely revolutionized our practice. We're not going back. It is fundamentally, there was a world before, a world after. It's deeply different for the better.
Okay. Well, so I don't want to bury the lead at all. Some people, including me, raise the point that there's a huge amount of spending. Again, Gartner, I think, said something like for 2025, there's an estimated 644 billion, if I recall the data point correctly, estimated for this year. Everyone can't be in the top 10%. So that's a lot of money and a lot of organizational restructuring around this technology. So are there any parallels to be drawn between, let's say, the tulip hysteria in Holland in the 17th century, the dot-com bubble, the GFC? Like, is that hysterical, or is there some substance to comparison?
I mean, the foundations are genuine. I mean, anybody who spend 30 minutes playing with ChatGPT, the shock is just incredible. Those LLMs are doing something that is mind-boggling. Same for image generation, same for all those classes of generative technology. The shock is real. There is really something here. We are not talking of pure speculation. The technology is real. Now we can discuss whether the valuation of the companies who are at the genesis of those technologies is justified. That's another question that depends on whether they can really the technology will remain something limited to a small number of companies as providers, or be extensively commoditized. That's a different question. But the technical innovation is real. However, the problem is that I think many companies approach those transformational technologies the wrong way. They just identify correctly the potential, and then they just allocate budget on it. And that was the same for the web. That was, the web is skyrocketing. Okay, let's have like a $50 million web project. It's going to be a web portal, and we are going to consolidate the ideas of everybody and see what flies. And guess what? It was wasted money at the time. And Gen AI is very frequently approached the same way, and it will be wasted money now. And the problem is that it's typically not a problem that you would solve by actually pouring much money on the case.
Well, that's the question, yes.
Yeah, it is more, you need to look inward in your business and what needs to change to take advantage of those technologies, which are quite cheap, in fact. So, and again, that was the same for the web. The web is cheap. Generative AI is cheap. Cloud computing adoption is cheap. Again, if you use it at massive scale, yes, it will be expensive. But when you want to get started, there is no reason to think that if you want to leverage generative AI, it starts at millions of dollars. It starts at $20 per month with Google Gemini subscription or ChatGPT subscription. And so for me, the real case is that there is a lack of substance, because very frequently people who are venturing like that, they don't have really
mechanical sympathy.
Yes, they're lacking, I would say, empathy for their own business on how they are going to use. So there is empathy for the use case. How am I going to that? That would be empathy with the customer. And then mechanical sympathy to indeed understand the potential and limitation of the technology, so that what you try has like a 90% chance to succeed. I mean, at Lokad, I've done, again, on laws of small numbers, but my series of attempts at generative AI for various stuff, it's over 90% success, because I have, I think, a good idea of what things have a very decent chance of working, and I don't even try the stuff where I think it's not going to work.
Well, that is a key point, because what you just said there, when you use it, again, rough numbers, approximately 90% success rate. When I posted about this on LinkedIn, I got a lot of private feedback of people saying, yeah, for me, on an individual level, it is transformative. I went from performing at this level to this level. I can parallelize a lot of different tasks. My individual productivity has skyrocketed. So then the question becomes, what is missing on the individual level, where people can individually be incredibly productive? But then when you have a company, which is a collection of individuals, suddenly, according to a wide array of data sources, that productivity just collapses inwardly.
Yeah, because again, when I say collapse, if you start a Gen AI projects, it's a for the vast majority of companies, approaching a transformative technology through the lens of the technology itself is wrong. You need to think, what am I going to do for my customer that makes my company, better, more efficient, the quality of serve my customers better, and then it turned out that things that used to be impossible have now become possible, thanks to generative AI. Not everything. A lot of things that were impossible still remain impossible, but we have a slightly wider, range of options, and that's where there is massive opportunity. But you see, you cannot just allocate money to Gen AI and expect that things will come out. That's exactly the sort of attitude that companies had with their web portals 25 years ago. Say, oh, the web is great. Let's put dozens of millions on something web. No, but if you have the idea, okay, I'm going to have an e-commerce store, then very good, and you execute it brilliantly. Okay, but you see, it's very different from saying, I invest 10 million on the web, or I build an e-commerce store and an e-commerce experience for my customer base. That's a very, very different proposition.
Well, then again, this comes back to a key point. I'm paraphrasing. You can correct me where I'm wrong. It sounded like you said you're not surprised that there's not a great ROI yet because it's too early to tell. Okay, we can play with that. Yes. We can play with that hypothesis, but then you do still have to show some impact. So if you're not measuring return on investment, what in general, or what are signs that people are doing the right stuff or they're having a good impact?
I mean, if you try to you have an ambition and you try to use those technologies and you don't end up in a position where you say, okay, the world I live today is now radically different from the one that used before, then you missed a turn. Just to give a few examples.
Yeah,
at Lokad, a few years ago, we decided to go for automated translation. We have our website is our website is automatically translated nowadays. It has been for years, but we went from I am managing more than half a dozen of professional translators to zero, and it's completely automated. And now, whenever we publish a page in English, within hours, we'll have the page translated in more than half a dozen of languages. So you see, the before and after are just different world. It's one case was we were managing a team. We even had an app to manage the workflow of those translators. Nowadays, it's purely automated. So that's one extreme case. But we have similar situations where, for example, RFP engines, where we have a request for proposal. Some companies send us hundreds of questions, and we now answer them automatically. Again, that's the sort of things where we went from questions to let's spend 20 minutes to have those same 400 questions being answered, with then a few hours spent on the most important one to have like the human touch and improve on the questions that are very key. Bear in mind that in a RFP you have hundreds of questions that are very pedestrian, like will you accept to have an NDA for our data and whatnot. You have tons of very pedestrian questions that needs to be answered, but they don't necessarily deserve the attention of a human in this process. So again, I'm talking of something where with or without Gen AI, it's not of an impact that is like 1%. No, it's day and night. The impact is absolutely massive. It is completely, the new process is completely unlike the previous one. And it is perceptibly vastly better, even if you can't really measure. It would be very difficult for a company like Lokad to say, what is the exact ROI of automating the super tedious problem of answering RFPs.
You can measure in work hours how long it took before.
Yes, but that would be vastly underestimating the case, because the reality is that you don't necessarily have that many people who are in your team capable of answering that, and then the very few people who are capable, it's super tedious. So
And they don't want to do that all day.
it's punishment for them. You know, again,
We know some people who've had to do them.
So I mean, nobody enjoys, you know, going through 400 questions to answer, especially when you're doing that every couple of weeks, where it's the same questions that are going to come back. So so that means that what about, thanks to this new process, you can retain your best people in your sales team, you know, longer.
Well,
it's super difficult to assess, but the impact is massive.
Well, again, so this is a good point because it actually transitions to the next topic, which is you've outlined very well and eloquently let's say the marketing applications, the administrative applications. When we talk squarely in the domain of the supply chain and supply chain optimization domain, are you familiar with specific Gen AI use cases that are in production? And the reason I ask is an IDC study from earlier this year found that 88%, let's just say 9 out of 10, Gen AI pilots in this domain, like we're talking about actual supply chain decision-making processes, never make it into production. And they refer to it as a proof of concept dead zone. So are you familiar with specific supply chain use cases that have actually graduated?
Yes, but in supply chain, so supply chain is a very quantitative game.
Yeah.
At least the way Lokad see it, it's about resource allocation. For you want to allocate your resources, inventory, production capacity, transport capacity, shelf capacity, etc., with thinking if I invest $1 of capacity in anything, can be inventory capacity, etc., what is the option that give me the highest return once you take into account all possible futures to have like a risk-adjusted, optimized decision. Okay. Now, this is a highly quantitative problem, and here LLMs are not a good fit for, I would say, to approach that directly. LLMs can approach that indirectly, potentially to help you generate the numerical recipe that govern your decisions. If your decisions are governed by a numerical recipe. At Lokad, this is the case for our clients, but for most companies, this is not the case. So the LLM is like powerless. And then you have a few ancillary, you know, use cases. But again, this is like a bonus add-on. For example, for catalog data cleaning, where you want to improve your product labels, you want to enrich your catalog with, let's say, categories that were not existing. That is the sort of things where LLM can really help you. But it's not solving the core supply chain problem. It is just making your life much nicer when solving some of the sub-problem of supply chain. So it's good. It's useful.
It was very useful.
But if you start front and center and say, I'm going to do a Gen AI project, it's not going to solve your supply chain problems, because as far as supply chain is concerned, Gen AI is more like, again, an optional technology that will, for sub problems, will make your life much easier. But again, we are at
I'm just going to plug this in and everything's gravy, as opposed to here are useful sub-applications they're not as sexy as an entire transformation, but they help.
Yes. And again, when you have transformational technologies, you need to rethink your business as well. You see, just think of the web. Okay, you have a website, but it's in itself, it's kind of useless. That's those web portals were mostly useless. What is, for example, very useful is to have an e-commerce. But then in e-commerce, that means that you need to have a distribution center that can do those fulfillment. So it's not just the web technology. You realize that, okay, if I want to make money on the web, then I need to reorganize my entire business so that I can operate this e-commerce segment. It's a much more demanding transformation compared to just invest and get a website. You see, so here that's where I say those investments are typically a little bit misguided, because they would invest in web portals, and Gen AI is the same, on the naked technology instead of considering the transformation of the business that goes along. You see, that's and for Gen AI, that's where I'm absolutely not buzzword-driven investment, and that just never flies. And it has been the case for the last probably 50 years of software-driven innovation in the broader world.
Are there any subtle signs that people can internally discern? Like, okay, I can't measure ROI yet, but here are some indications that maybe we want to, pause the spending a bit, or inversely, or conversely, we should increase the spending?
The reality is that don't think of it as an investment. It's too early. You know, investment is. I need to think of the problem as a capital allocation problems. Once I know I would say the terrain, once I know where I should be investing. So and here again, it's a technology that is very cheap. So the question is more like, do you have people who identified something that would make a lot of sense and that can be, you know, prototype even at the level of one employee, and you have something that works, and then you say, okay, I have this thing, it really makes sense. I can see it makes sense. It resonates. I don't even need to really have like fancy metrics. I know it is just good. Just think of it when I went from managing 6 translators to completely automated end-to-end translation. It is not about, I didn't do a case study, you know, it was very obvious. And what's more, we could actually got better translations. That was the surprising thing. You could think, oh, if it's going to be a machine, it's going to be worse. Turn out that no, it was actually higher quality. Why? Because Lokad has so much to translate that at the price point we were negotiating, our translators could not just spend, you know, infinite amount of time on every pages to be translated. So it had to be done swiftly, and so the quality would sometimes suffer. And again, LM solves that. But you see, do you have something that truly makes sense? And can you just imagine, go back to this translation? You can first do it on limited scale. I use ChatGPT to translate. Is it good? Does it work? Yes, it works. Can I even provide some extra contextual instruction to make the translation better? Yes, and it works. And now, once I have validated that, I can enter the investment phase where I say, okay, I need to robotize that, not for 1 page, that's a demo, but for 1,000 pages, and put some IT plumbing to make it more convenient. That's a very different thing, is that when I engage into the robotization of the initiative, I was already like 100% convinced that it would work. You know, I had already, you know, stress tested the thing on doing manually a few pages, and that's the sort of things that will be the same thing. You know, again, if we go back to the web, is that if you do a thought experiment, is it really making sense? You know, e-commerce would be okay. If I do an e-commerce and I start to sell a few products online, does it make sense? Is there anybody willing to do that? If I cannot do a thought experiment where it's going to really resonate with you know what I'm trying to deliver for my clients, then probably it's nonsense, and you should just stop the project even before considering actually pouring more money on it.
Well, again, you're describing very, let's say, text-based applications, and again, those are certainly transformative. We know that because we do that in-house. There are also other applications, again, even at the initial stages of forecasting, where you can actually deploy Gen AI, and we do that as well. And you know this far better than I do, excuse me. But again, in terms of using embeddings as part of initial forecasting, etc., there are applications of LLMs in this.
Yeah,
process.
But again, it's like an add-on.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. It's a sub-step.
Lokad is doing probabilistic forecasting, and if you use embedding, then you can get slightly better probabilities in some circumstances. But again, this is I would say
it's an element.
It's an element, and here it's very incremental. You see, and I believe that if that's probably not what people are looking for when they think Gen AI.
Exactly.
They're not thinking about something that is just going to make one sub-process slightly better. They want to think of what is going to be super, super transformative.
And very visible immediately.
Yes, and here you have such of situations. For example, can you automate the relationship with your suppliers, for example, and they have emails, and you write emails and they write back, and can that be extensively automated? And again, you don't need an IT company and multiple millions to figure that out. You can do a thought experiment. Say, can I compose a prompt that would give a reasonable answer to this question raised by a supplier? Can I actually compose a prompt that would compose the email reasonable that I want to send to this supplier? Does it work? Can I have the toy prototype working. And then once I have that, then we can start thinking about automating. Our businesses can start thinking about automating big portion of what they do with this sort of technologies.
Well, so this is, again, why this topic to me is so interesting is because there are multiple strains to this, and I think we've covered potential applications of it, but the actual process of applying that is a big problem. So just let me add some context here. Too many for me to go through. I'm just going to group them as many studies this year that a lack of robust change management, there is a lack of a robust change management for these Gen AI projects. Read between the lines, they're just being forced into place. So my question is, do you think that better change management would help raise the numbers in terms of ROI? That's like training, prompt skilling.
No. I think that's exactly what I was talking about, capital allocation. Yeah. You see the buzzword, it could be cloud computing, big data, blockchain, and now it's Gen AI, and say, we allocate this many million on that. This is just wrong. And then you wonder about the change management. No, it starts with, there is something that I understand on how I can serve my client better, and it entails a transformation. And this transformation is made possible as the end game just because Gen AI is there. But you see, it's really thinking it completely differently. You start by focusing on crafting the right problem. So you see, it's 90% of the effort is crafting the right problem and not the technical execution. Let's go back to the web. The web portal was thinking about creating a website, and the web technologies, that was the problem. It's absolutely not. The web is easy as far as technologies goes. Having a website up and running is the easy part. Having an e-commerce business that is profitable is a difficult part. So you see, just think, thought experiment, you say, what I want is to have a very thriving e-commerce segment. That's what I want to create. Maybe you will realize that the web part of this investment is going to be maybe just not really related to web technologies. You have many other problems that you want to solve if you want to have an e-commerce, viable e-commerce business. And same thing for Gen AI. If you think tech first, that means you invest in that. Maybe for the transformation that you're looking for, 95% of the effort will have nothing to do with Gen AI. Gen AI will just be the one component that made this world transformation possible, and before that it would have been completely impossible. You see, it just makes something possible, but the rest of the transformation is your focus. That's your starting point. Gen AI is just plugged at the right place, but it becomes like a technicality, critical, but fundamentally a technicality.
Well, the way you're the advice that you seem to be imparting, I don't know, because I know you well at this point. I'm not sure even you believe that. Not that. Let me rephrase that. When you say that what big companies need to do is they need to rethink the problem, and then once they've rethought the problem, they can work backwards, and then identify the nodes on the map where they can plug in AI. How likely is that on the scale that we're discussing when we're talking about half a $1 trillion?
I mean, again, it's going to be fairly rare, and based on historical. You see,
you heard it here.
For example, how many companies 15 years ago were massively investing in data centers? 2 of them.
Yes.
The guts to do what Jeff Bezos said. Oh, you know what? We are investing so much in our data centers that we are going to open that to the world. People would say, oh, Amazon, just think how many banks had super large data centers and they could have done this move 10 years earlier. Amazon didn't have at the time the largest data centers of the world. There were very large banking corporations that had data centers that were way larger. But the guts was this sort of emerging, technologies that we have come to call cloud computing. Well, it turned out that Bezos decided that, we are selling books, but we are also going to rent servers. And that's the sort of transformation I'm talking about. Here, this is very challenging because it requires very deep transformation in your business. And statistically, I would say, just if you observe the last century of business, you realize that very few large companies manage to do that truly. And that is just history of business talking. So obviously, tons of brilliant management teams will manage to be the outliers that outperform the market and do the turn that where their peers failed. But they are going to be the outliers.
But then we circle back to the original point about essentially a bubble. If a lot of people are investing a lot of money in a thing that they're not equipped to deal with or execute properly, doesn't that mean at some point a critical mass will be reached and then there'll be a huge fallout?
A bubble is as if it was truly exceptional. So what I see in GenAI is that we have very high valuations for a series of company that could be a bubble. Yes. But then for I would say businesses spending money, my own take is that the businesses, you see, I would say the baseline would be probably 80% of the money spent on enterprise software is wasted. That's the baseline. So maybe GenAI is 90%, but the reality is that the baseline is that 80% is wasted. So for me, there is not really a very specific bubble on GenAI. It's more like the buzzword of the day. Last year it would have been, or a few years ago, it would have been wasted on something else. It would have been wasted on blockchain, for example. And before that, it would have been wasted on some sort of random big data initiative. And before that, random Web 2.0 initiative, etc., etc. So you see, for me, it's just, I see that the bulk of the money being spent by large companies on software projects is wasted. Again, 80% would be my baseline. So here, it's not really too far outside the norm. It's just a little bit bigger. And I would not see a bubble that is as significant on this front compared to the really mind-blowing valuation that you have for the GenAI companies, broadly speaking.
True, and there is another dimension to that consideration, though, which is a lot of companies. Let's just take one, not one of our clients, Shopify, and them introducing GenAI skills as an actual requirement for hiring and for evaluation purposes because they're going all in on this technology. So there's another consideration to this, which is the actual employment restructuring effect of this technology, which in the near term might actually be for naught.
Yeah, again, that's where I would challenge that a little. You see, my take is that Shopify has a very specific business model that is not overly complex. You see, again, if we talk of our clients that would be running, let's say, aviation, so it's 1,000 different trades, super arcane, extremely difficult, where it takes months to even understand what is going on exactly in this segment of the business, because it's very technically very challenging, very complicated, really super complicated.
But they're just an example of the trend.
Yes, and so my point is, if probably I would say for something like Shopify, yes, it's very good if the corporate culture is more, leaning into those emerging trends. Yes. But my take is that it will mostly fall on the shoulders of the top management to identify the key things that will really where GenAI will really transform the experience for the customers of and partners of Shopify. You see, I do not see this business as so diffuse that it's going to be a bottom-up transformation. I would say the same thing for, let's say, Apple. Yep. When you have like a super massive business built around one hyper successful product, which is the iPhone. It's not really having like 100,000 employees that are familiar with ChatGPT who is going to transform your company. It's more like the very top who understand very clearly what does it mean for Apple, for the iPhone, and then roll out something that really makes sense, making the right choices. That's where I would say, yes, there is a culture shift, but the challenge for most companies will lie, I think, in the management more than at the bottom of the pyramid.
All right, well, I'm going to just push on a little bit. And I want to ask you, because it's actually something that had been message to me privately there on LinkedIn. So we're on YouTube right now because of technical difficulties with LinkedIn. But it sets up this next question, which is that Gartner, whatever you think, we're live, whatever you think, according to their top 10 strategic technology trends of 2025, that is the source, they put agentic AI, so again, that's autonomous software agents that act as virtual workers. They put that at the head of its list. So the question there is, chatbots, AI agents, do you see these as the game changer that Gartner's?
It's what Lokad has been doing for a decade. And yes, it is absolutely game changing. But here, I would say, just let's push aside the buzzwords. What we want is unattended decision making. That is game changing. Then what are the technologies to make that possible? I would say LLMs are a tiny, tiny, small part that is actually optional to make that happening. So if by agentic AI, you mean the outcome that we want is unattended decision making, so we decide what to buy, what to build, where to stock, the price we put on display, all of that change daily automatically in a way that is unattended, yes, it is absolutely massive. So if Gartner, by agentic AI, this is what they mean, then I agree. If by agentic AI, what they mean is putting an LLM inside a loop, then I disagree.
Okay. Well, I'm out of my questions. I will transition to the questions that were submitted. Again, some of these came in through LinkedIn, even though we are actually on YouTube. So thanks for that. Thank you for making the transition. So, John? John, I'm going to read this verbatim. It's quite long. What publicly available metrics can we use to gauge industry-wide progress in adopting generative AI and extracting financial value from it? Should we look at Gen AI API spend, large-scale layoffs, or other signals? So I can repeat that if you want.
No, it's good.
Okay,
it's good.
It's a long question.
My suggestion is do not look at metrics. Metrics will be lagging. And when the metrics will be visible, it will be too late. Again, just think of Amazon with e-commerce. Amazon was nothing. You know, it was a nothing burger for a company like Walmart until suddenly they were unstoppable and too large. You see, and the same thing happened for digital cameras, you know, versus the old, I would say, chemical cameras. It's like digital cameras were nothing, and then they were suddenly, you know, dominant. And that's the thing with most technological transformation. And the same happened in many industries. For example, fly-by-wire for aviation, it was nothing, and then Airbus did it, and then it was the norm. And anything that was not fly-by-wire was pretty much toast. So that's the sort of things where the problem is that metrics will be lagging. Yes, you will see at some point layoff, but those layoffs will be done, you know, years after. Because again, companies don't necessarily, they can automate, they have like massive productivity saving, but they are not necessarily going to trigger the layoff immediately because they want to preserve morale, they want to be, they want to be nice, they want to give people the opportunity to move somewhere else, and then there will be an economic downturn, possibly a decade after, and then there will be the layoff. But you see, so you can have effects that are extremely lagging. And so those metrics, I think, also for the API spend, yes, but it will be very difficult because you will have AI specialists or, you know, companies like Lokad that can completely distort the market because they are spending really a lot. So when you see that a lot of people are spending money on that, is it like your average company, or is it 90% of the spending is done by very, very specific companies, let's say the video gaming industry? Okay, so that will be difficult. My take is that do not pay attention too much to the metrics. They are irrelevant in case of technological transformation. You're back in 2000, you've not experienced shopping online, and you try to project your inner self at, is it going to change the life of my customers if they can buy online? That's an example of, okay, that's going to be really something different and transformative. And here you want to think, can I do something that is really transformative for my customers with those technologies? If yes, then go for it. Do not wait. If you wait, you will be facing, giants that have popped out of nowhere when you finally decide to go in this direction.
Well, perhaps this is something of a, based on what you've said. I mean, Lokad obviously has an ROI first perspective when it comes to decisions. So to the CFOs watching, and we both know many actually in our networks, to the CFOs who are watching and who have got in touch privately to say, yeah, time to time about, okay, what is the return in whatever way you want to express it? What is the return? What is the impact? What advice would you give to them specifically, the CFOs, when it comes to navigating these projects and their role in all of this?
I think for CFOs, the key question is that what is the value add of your white collar workforce? And if we have to have a, then you have to really ask very tough questions and maybe play with ChatGPT to think, is this thing, going to be automated? Or is it going to, or is it, really beyond what the technology can do? You don't need to have expensive consultants, expensive IT companies extra to answer those questions.
ChatGPT is pretty good at this.
You can play with ChatGPT and do thought experiment and do small experiment to answer this question. And here, those questions, by doing that, you can answer, and that will be the gist of the message. Do we think that those technologies are automating 10% of our workforce, 20% or 90%? For example, for Lokad, there are entire classes of tasks that have been automated to 100%. So we go from half a dozen people involved to zero. So it's
for that task.
For that task, yes, exactly.
Clear.
So again, I think that's an assessment where, as a CFO, I would say start building, a deep assessment of your white collar workforce and what is exactly at stake. And then set a trajectory. Obviously, that's just to see the sort of return on investment. But then that would mean that it's very deep transformation, and it's not going to be CFO led. It's those transformations are so deep. Just think back about Amazon. You're an online book retailer and you want to become a cloud computing provider. It's obviously at the very top that the decisions will be made. Probably CEO will have to convince the board, considering the sort of magnitude of transformations we are talking about.
Okay. Well, Joannes, we're out of questions and we're definitely out of time. To the people who did attend on YouTube and to the people who watch this later, thank you for your attention. And by the way, if you're not already connected with Joannes and me on LinkedIn, why not? We're lovely. Reach out. We'll talk. But with that, Joannes, thank you very much for joining me and for your answers. And to everyone else, I say, get back to work.